Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel session on career success outside of London. I'm Emily. I'm a TARGETjobs editor, and as someone who chose to start my own career outside of London, I'm very interested to hear what our panelists have to say. We've got a few questions to start off with, and then we're going to answer some of yours. So if you put yours in the question panel, and try and keep them fairly broad so that we can help as many people as possible. I'm going to hand over to our panelists now. So if you'd both like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. So maybe Joe to start with.
Hi, so I'm Joe. I work for EY. I'm currently in my 4th year of the School Leaver Apprenticeship Programme, working in UKI Assurance from the Leeds office, from Sheffield originally. So sort of stayed relatively local rather than moving down to London. But yeah, that's sort of a little bit about me.
And Rosie?
Thank you. Yes, so my name's Rosie Ellis. I am the UK Early Careers Programme Manager for Aon. I have recently moved into that role actually, where I manage all of the development programmes for our graduates, our interns, our industrial placements and our apprentices. Prior to that, I actually worked in the early careers recruitment team, and I was in that team for about 5.5 years. So from that piece, I managed the marketing, the attraction, the selection, and kind of the onboarding piece for kind of all our different programs all across the UK as well. So also based outside of London, I'm actually based in our Farnborough office, but because I recruit for across the UK and now manage the programs for across the UK, I spend a lot of my time, well, I did formerly spend a lot of my time bouncing around the kind of the regional offices in the UK. So yeah, really excited to talk about these opportunities.
Great. So first question was, what opportunities do you offer or are you planning to offer outside of London? So Rosie, would you like to start off?
Yeah, happy to. So, so for those of you who don't know much about Aon, so we're a financial professional services firm. We're a global organisation, so we have about 50,000 employees worldwide. About 6,000 of those are based in the UK. Our global headquarters is based in London. It's quite a substantial one. It's the cheese grater building in the city, so it's a difficult one to miss. And of kind of the 6,000 employees we have in the UK, about 4,000 of those are based outside of London, in about 28 different office locations. So we really do have kind of a huge amount of our UK talent and colleagues and clients based outside of London. From an early careers perspective, about 40% of our early careers roles last year, so that includes our graduate roles, our intern roles and our industrial placement roles, were actually based in the regional offices rather than in London. It does vary a little bit depending on which part of the business you join, as kind of there can be certain programs and teams that are more London centric, but yeah, 40% of our graduates this year are going to be recruited outside of London also. And to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if with everything happening and the kind of the growing kind of nature of location flexibility and virtual working and things like that, if that number didn't continue to grow in kind of the future months and years as well. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities for people looking to join outside of London.
Joe?
So EY is also a professional services firm. We have 4 main sectors, each of which you can do different apprenticeships or work in. There's, I believe, 3 offices in London now. I think we opened a 3rd one this year. And then there's regional offices all up and down the country. So as I mentioned, there's Leeds, Manchester, and then Bristol, Cambridge, sort of all up and down, all offering the school leaver and graduate programs there. It does depend sort of based on size of office, how many people you can take for each different service line. So assurance is the biggest one and is offered at every office. Whereas if you wanted to go into something a bit more specific, for example, consulting, you might need to go to some of the bigger offices where there'll be more availability. But as the offices are growing, there's more and more opportunities across the country. And as we're working more remotely, there might be a bit more flexibility to work with teams up and down the country, depending on where you're based. I'm not sure exactly on the numbers of grads and school leavers, but in the 4 years I've been there, it's been going up every single year. And there seems to be, in the Leeds office, I think there was about 30 people that we took on last year through the graduate scheme, so relatively large number.
And what do you each see as the benefits of working in London?
I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there are obviously, the working in London can be seen as kind of, obviously you're in the capital city. It's very exciting. It's, there's a certain amount of from a social and a personal perspective, there's a lot of excitement, especially for kind of the graduate population to kind of want to be in London. But I do personally think that a lot of the benefits that are considered for working in London actually kind of roll out to a lot of the other locations as well. So I think one of the kind of expectations of working in London is that there's kind of greater opportunities to network, more exposure to senior leadership, more opportunities for career progression. And you know what, this is probably true in some industries, in some certain organizations, but I can genuinely say for Aon, it's very much based on the colleague rather than their office location. So yes, we do have a lot of senior leaders in our London office, but we also have, our head of EMEA for retirement and investment is based in our Birmingham office, for example, and our head of retail is up in Manchester, and a number of our insurance broking leads are out in our Chelmsford office. So yes, there is leadership exposure in London, but that's also true to say for the regional offices as well. And I think the same goes with networking opportunities. Yes, there is more colleagues in London, so you could look at it on the surface as the assumption that means that there's more opportunity to network in the London location. But that is only true if the colleague in question is kind of taking up those networking opportunities and putting themselves out there. So you can have someone in the London office that has a much smaller network than actually someone who's working in one of the regional offices, because they're kind of taking it for granted, and they're not putting themselves out there, and they're not attending all the events they're being invited to, and they're not reaching out to kind of colleagues to build those networks in the same way. So it really it really does depend much more on the individual, I think, than from kind of the office location. I can actually honestly say this from personal experience. So I've been at Aon for 8.5 years. I've been regionally based that entire time, although a big chunk of the recruitment team, the talent team, the learning and development teams are based in London. I've never been based in the London office. I've always spent 1 or 2 days up there a week, but it's never kind of worked for me to commute up there full time. And I've been able to achieve kind of 3 promotions in 5 years. So it's definitely not hindered my career progression in any way, shape or form, being based in the regional offices versus being based in London. And I know that there's a lot of colleagues who have had very similar experiences, and I think it's a really positive demonstration of showing that actually the career progression outside of London does kind of align with what you would hope for inside of London as well. So I think when I consider the benefits of working in the London office for certain industries, I think if we'd have been having this conversation 6 months ago, we would be saying, yes, it's so important to be in London. Insurance broking, for example, being in opposite Lloyd's of London and kind of having all that face-to-face contact with brokers and underwriters and kind of being in the thick of it. Absolutely, people would have shouted about the fact that that's such an important part of the industry to be in London. But so much has shifted in the last 6 months, and so many things that a lot of industries didn't realize were going to be possible have actually been possible, and they have actually been able to adapt. That I think the kind of the question of the benefits of being in London for certain industries is really going to start shifting, and it's already shifted, and it's going to continue to shift moving forward. So I think when it comes to considering the benefits of working in London, it's a lot more around a personal preference and kind of your personal life and where you want to be based. And you know, the kind of the city lifestyle is available in London, but it's also available in other cities across the UK. So I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration. I think it's quite, it's not uncommon for graduates to assume that the best grad jobs are the London jobs, whereas actually if kind of you deconstruct it a bit more, you'll actually see that that's just the location. There is as many good jobs across the UK and as many good opportunities across the UK. And when thinking about where your future career, future role is going to start or where you're going to be based, it's as much about the kind of the career as it is around your personal life, about you, where you want to be, where your support network is, where you kind of want to build kind of your life to start your career. So I think it's very important to consider the balance of that. Absolutely.
And that was a really good point about how it's down to you to make most of the networking opportunities that you have, rather than what opportunities there are.
Absolutely.
Joe?
So for me, I've never personally worked in London myself. I've been down there for training and sort of seen some of the offices. There do tend to be some nicer views from the London offices than there are in some of the regional ones, just because of where they're based. But similar to what Rosie said, it's very much about personal preference now. Sort of, there's opportunities for progression in each of the regional offices at EY. Each of them has senior managers, directors, partners, all local to that office. And as you do, if you were to go further into like the CEOs and stuff, it's not, you don't have to be based in London for that. You probably do more work out of there, but there's some local to Leeds. So there's some Leeds-based and Manchester-based partners who are sat in those positions and do work on the local clients, along with their other opportunities there. Again, sort of very similar to what Rosie said with the networking opportunities. There is stuff locally. It may be sort of bigger networks in London just because of the amount of different people. And if you were to say want to network with some of the different firms, there's probably more firms in a closer proximity in London to what there are if you were to go regionally. Sort of maybe a couple of big firms, whereas opposed to London where you've got 10 or 15 sort of down on the same road. So it's all about preference. Me personally, I prefer the slightly less busy lifestyle of being in a regional office, as opposed to London where everyone seems to be on the move all the time and there's never seems to be lights off in the office buildings. Whereas regionally, I feel it's a bit smaller. Everyone's slightly more relaxed at times, and it's just sort of, yeah, just life moves a bit more at my pace.
Yeah, I completely agree there. What do you each see as the benefits? You've touched on this already, but what do you see as the benefits of working outside of London? Maybe start with Joe this time.
Yeah, you go for it, Joe.
Cheers. So for me, there's one big difference from being based in London to being in the regional offices, especially when you're going through the graduate and school leaver programs, and that's the amount of different coverage that you get. Obviously, down in London, you work on a lot bigger clients and a lot bigger teams, so you'll tend to just sort of look at one or two different areas in the first couple of years that you're there, and you'll get great coverage over it. And it's probably one of the most complicated one of the most complicated cash accounts you'll see on any company. But you won't then see anything else to do with the profit and loss or with the balance sheet. Whereas regionally, because it's smaller teams, some of the companies are a bit smaller, sort of, it's a slightly different risk profile. So you are able to get more of a coverage, sort of a bit more of a basic level and a more rounded experience. And for me, that's really important and really beneficial. So when as I've progressed and I've gone on training, you start to see the difference between what people have looked at and what they haven't. And you feel a lot. No, it helps also for exams as well, where in exams, they're not just asking you about cash that you're doing in your day-to-day life. They're asking you about sort of how you do your stock and your loan accounts and everything. And if you've looked at that a little bit in your job, for me, it clicks a bit better and everything just sort of seems to fit a bit more as you progress. Obviously, if you prefer to work on the bigger clients, you will progress and get the knowledge that you need from them as you're down in London. But for me personally, I prefer the more rounded experience, as then when I'm progressing further on in my career, I've then got more choices to choose if I want to go and specialize in anything or move into a different section. I've got that base knowledge in more areas and won't have to start from scratch again.
No, those are all great points, and yeah, definitely a lot of things that are kind of similar to the grads and the apprentices that start at Aon. I think, yeah, a couple of things just for me to add to that one is, you know, the just touching a bit on what Joe said. So kind of in the regional offices, you will generally be in kind of smaller teams, and it's a smaller environment than in London, so the opportunity to kind of get involved with possibly more senior work quicker might be available than it would be in the London, where you're fighting out for opportunities above a much higher group of kind of graduates and apprentices. So I suppose it's kind of, there's more opportunity to shine and to stand out in the regional offices with the smaller group. I mentioned a bit before about leadership exposure, and I think that's really important to keep in mind when thinking about the regional offices, because as much as there may be more leaders in London, the opportunities to actually work alongside them is much more prevalent in the regional offices, to actually work with your senior leaders on client work, on project work, as opposed to just being aware of their presence because they're running from client meeting to client meeting in London. I think that's definitely more obvious in the regional offices. And I think, to be honest, one of the biggest ones for us is our early careers hires, our early careers graduates and interns all get paid the same in London and outside of London, and all the training and the benefits are the same. So financially, ultimately, those in the regions end up being kind of a bit more comfortable because of living costs, and that definitely has an impact in kind of a lot of different aspects of their lives. One of my apprentices who started 2 years ago just bought her own house, and I can tell you right now, she was not one of the ones that joined in London. And you know, these kind of opportunities, again, it's thinking about the bigger picture. It's about thinking about the career, but also the personal life and everything that comes with that. And actually, it's kind of balancing up what works for you. And you know, she never wanted to work in London. She wanted to work regionally because for her, she wanted to kind of stay at home, stay with their family, stay with that support network, and save up money to be able to get onto the property ladder. And it worked out well for her. So there's, you know, having that the same kind of equality when it comes to salary and training across the regions, I think really does help help our kind of graduates kind of appreciate that actually the expectations of them across the offices is the same, and we don't expect different things from our London graduates, so we're not going to pay them differently than we would for those in the regions. And I think that does have a really big impact on the grads in the regional offices.
Great. Do you have any tips on how graduates can make themselves known in the regional office if the head office is in London?
So for me, to make yourself known in London, it's not too important when you're in the regional offices at EY, because until you get into sort of like your senior manager and sort of everything, you're looking to promote yourself higher in the business, you will be working with a lot of the people you are in your office. So it's sort of more trying to get yourself seen locally and sort of make sure you take part in the socials and the networking events that are available, making sure that sort of when you're doing your work, you're trying to put yourself out there. But then also, as I mentioned earlier, when I've done training down in London, that's with a mix of people from different offices as well. So as long as you're engaged in the training when you're down there, you sort of try not to be too shy and don't just stick to speaking to the people that you can see every day in your offices. Try and have a chat with the other people from different offices and sort of get to know them a little bit. And then as sort of people maybe around us, then you do sort of have people from different offices that you will know of. But sort of to try and, I think it depends where you are in your career path as to how much you'd want to sort of make yourself seen in London. For me, it's not really a massive priority that one of the partners down in London knows me, because I'm just sort of looking at working my way through my exams and then sort of trying to establish myself in my regional office. So doing stuff with my local partners, and then if I need to, sort of I'll ask the local partners how they sort of got in contact with people in different offices, and you try and get them to help utilize their network as well and move through that way.
Yeah, I think there are so many different kind of bits of advice I could give for graduates building their network in general. I think graduates will generally be invited to so many different kind of activities and events and training sessions, and I think just getting involved in as many as possible is really, really important. There will be a lot of business specific or industry specific things that you're involved in, with meetings with the teams, or kind of client meetings or any kind of client networking and events. But what's really valuable is being involved with opportunities outside of kind of the core business area that you're involved in, to build up your knowledge and IQ of your company as a whole, but also build up your network that way. So our graduates and our apprentices, for example, they're involved a lot with our recruitment and development. So our graduates attend our university careers fairs, they attend our assessment centres and meet potential future candidates, as well as kind of colleagues from other parts of the business. They'll be invited to internal and external diversity, equity and inclusion events, which will really help build up their network. As well as a lot of our grads end up being involved in supporting training sessions for the future cohort of graduates, and working with senior partners in those parts of the business to design and implement training sessions that will be valuable for graduates that they've kind of learned, that they've learned kind of hands-on learning what will be valuable for them. I think being involved in as much outside of your role is also really valuable as being involved as much as possible in your role. I think reaching out is really important. I think you can't expect things to come for you, especially if you're in a large global organization. You would be surprised how many senior colleagues, senior leaders will be willing to have a 15-20 minute coffee, virtual coffee or face-to-face coffee with an early careers joiner who's taken the initiative to contact them and want to learn a bit more about them and their career path, and ask a couple of questions that they might have. These things won't necessarily come to you, and actually putting yourself out there is a really good way of building your relationship and building your knowledge as well. And this all kind of builds into building your personal brand, which I think is a really important skill for any early careers new joiners to keep in mind. And this isn't just about building up your network, it's about building up your knowledge and your understanding of your organization as a whole, building up your skills and your abilities and your kind of how you're performing in your role, and kind of getting all of these to a really high standard, because all of this ends up linking in with your network and who you're meeting and who you're seeing, and the impression that you're making on them as well, because that's the other thing. It's not just about meeting as many people as possible. You want to be making the good impression on those people, so you want to ensure you've got all the other stuff to back it up. You want to be able to be speaking to them about something that's value add, and asking the right questions, and that all comes from the time and effort that you're putting into your role as well. So I think it's important to kind of consider all those aspects as part of building your network, and not just about meeting as many people as possible.
Great. And how do you see your approach to the location of employers changing in the near and longer term future?
Shall I go first on that one?
Yeah, I go for it.
So we were kind of obviously COVID-19 and everything that's happened recently, we were already an agile working firm. So that means that all of our colleagues were set up with laptops. We didn't have kind of desks in our office. We all hot desked. We had the ability to work from home already and the ability to work from other offices. So I regularly used to work in the London office or in the Birmingham office or kind of Manchester or wherever I was going to be based. So we were already in a pretty good kind of position to deal with the virtual working. And as a result, we have been able to roll out virtual onboarding for all our new starters, all our early careers joiners this year. All our graduates, all our apprentices have joined virtually. We hosted an 8-week virtual internship this summer, and we were one of the few organisations actually were able to continue with our virtual internships. We were really pleased we were able to do that. And I think one of the really important things to come out of what's been happening globally is the kind of the demonstration of location flexibility, and the amount of those roles that seem to be so tied to location, whether that be London or kind of another location globally. Actually, we've had to adjust to that, and the kind of the the question about where a role is going to be based is absolutely being looked at in much greater detail now. So when we're looking at our hires for our 2021 intake, yes, we have requests for graduates to start in certain programs in certain locations, but the question is behind all of that, if we find the right candidate, does it matter? And I think that's really, really important to that actually to know that employers are asking that question, and we are actually taking that kind of really into consideration. And we have graduates that have started this year that are technically based in a certain office, but because of resource and capacity maybe in other teams, they're working on Manchester clients and Glasgow clients, whereas actually that's not something that the teams would have considered before. But they've realised that the adaptability has kind of almost opened the door for so many different opportunities. And I think it's also it's not just increased the flexibility in the UK, it's actually increased the flexibility globally. So our graduates this year, our early careers program this year for the first time has actually been a global delivery. It's not just UK. So our UK grads have been involved with training sessions and leadership sessions with the US grads, which is again something we never would have been able to do previously because of location, because we weren't going to fly 150 graduates out to Chicago to hear the CEO speak. But actually, considering he's delivering all these sessions virtually, we're able to get the UK graduates involved, which it's a fantastic opportunity that wouldn't have been available before, and we will continue moving forward. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the market, and I think we're not there yet. And I think what's going to happen in the next kind of year, 2 years is really going to represent a change in organizations' understanding of kind of more flexible working, which I think can only be a good thing for us as employees. So it can only mean good things when it comes to career development, because the exposure to different opportunities is not location tied. Suddenly, if you want to go for that promotion, but it's in the Birmingham office and you're based in the Chelmsford office, that's not a hindrance. That could open those doors a lot easier. But I also think that kind of the training and development opportunities that are going to be available is really going to increase. And I think the organizations' understanding of work-life balance and providing flexibility for colleagues for a number of different reasons, whether that be for kind of parent and carer duties or just for people's kind of life choices and hobbies and fitness and health and all these kind of things. Organizations are starting to really understand that it's not just about clocking in and clocking out in the same way, that actually there's more flexibility that's available, and actually you can trust your employees to do their job even if they're not sat right next to you all day every day. And I think that's something that's been really valuable, that's kind of come out of the last 6 months. It's exciting to see kind of what's, obviously the last 6 months haven't been exciting, but to see what's going to come out of it, I think is going to be really exciting.
For me, we are sort of where we're based has always been very client focused. It's if we're booked to a client, we were normally, well, for me personally, I was 90% of the time out on site of that client. And it was always something we talked about, sort of, can we get more flexible? Do we need to be there all this time? Because we have clients sort of spread out all across Yorkshire. So some people are having to drive 45 minutes in the morning and at night. And it just sort of, sometimes it just kills the productivity, especially when you're in the busier times where you're having to work an 8-hour day in a small office and then drive 45 minutes stuck in traffic. And then in the wintertime when it's dark as well. So we sort of spoke about flexibility before this all kicked in. And then it sort of got thrown to the next extreme where we were sort of going, oh, we'll maybe cut down to sort of 80% of the time on the client side. And then it was, right, we now can't go out. And I think what it's done, it's shown us that it is possible to do something that's fully virtual. I'd say it's probably not something that will stay in the format that it is now, with everything being fully virtual, because there are just some things that are a lot easier to get over the line. For example, when you get to the last couple of days and you need a couple of things signing, just to get something physically printed out and signed is a lot easier when you're sat in a room down from one of the directors at a client site, when it is to have to send them, get them to print it, sign it, get them to scan it, come back, check everything. some bits it just adds far too much admin than it is worth for just being there for a day or so. But I do feel like, and sort of from the responses we've had, as we've all got more used to working from home and we started to develop and get the systems in place to make sure that people are checking up on people without it causing a hindrance to their day, or without sort of getting people that aren't just sat on calls a day or actually do have time to do the work, and getting the coaching in as well, has been something that's been a rather big challenge, I know, especially with the new grads and everything coming in. It's something that we spoke about a lot, about how is best for someone who might have no idea about what they're doing when they come in, to really get across to them what they need to be doing. But we've got things like Zoom. We use Microsoft Teams, where you can share screens, sort of you can share a workbook or take control of someone's laptop, where you can then sort of point with your mouse to help point them in the right way. So I think going forward, there's going to be a lot more flexibility in, we're not going to be at client sites as much. There are going to be a lot more people that are sort of aren't working that standard 9 to 5, because they've got used to, in these 6 months, having more time where they can be off with childcare, taking 2-hour lunches where they can get some exercise in, and preferring working as they prefer, either working a bit early or finishing earlier, as long as people are aware of how they're working. I think the flexibility is working well for everyone, and it's something that we will like to try and continue, as long as it's not starting to hinder the client work. I think one thing that we've been quite lucky with is this currently hasn't gone into what's classed as our busy season, January to March, where the hours sort of tend to go a bit higher. It's a lot easier you needing to ask clients questions, but they're also very busy as well, trying to get everything finalized. So I think once, by the looks of it, we might still be working relatively flexibly in busy season with not much client contact. So we'll see how that works. And I think that'll be a true test of deciding sort of whereabouts we do end up sitting going forward, as to, do we all continue to work as remotely as possible? Do we go back to what it was before lockdown, or do we sort of try and meet somewhere in the middle and sort of make it a bit more team specific? So I think it's something where it definitely won't be as rigid as it was before, but there's definitely still some kinks to work out for further down the line. It'll be something that sort of just is a continually developing process.
Great. We've got quite a few questions come in, so to try and get through a few of them, rather than both of you answering, it might be best if just one of you jumps in for each question. So, if we were to start a role outside of London but change our minds, is there flexibility on moving offices?
I'm happy to answer that one. Yes, absolutely. I think the kind of the caveat that I would have to that is, I'm always really cautious with this question, because what I don't kind of want to encourage is candidates applying for regional roles thinking they're going to be less competitive, and then thinking, but I'll move to London in 6 months. That's obviously kind of a very different situation, and ultimately when teams are recruiting graduates, they are kind of looking for kind of motivation and kind of that long-term commitment. Now, that's not something that in reality happens with every single employee, and we are absolutely an organization that encourages progression across kind of different career paths and different locations, so there absolutely is the opportunity available to you, but I would also just kind of caveat that with, but I wouldn't look at a regional role as a way to kind of shortcut your way into a London opportunity, because it's not always that straightforward, to kind of do that very early on in your career. A lot of the time it would be once you've got some experience under your belt and you're able to then bring something to the table when looking for a new opportunity, because if a candidate, for example, started in a regional role, knew they really wanted to be in London, so just kind of plodded along a bit and then said, can I have a London role? There's no real incentive for that London team to say, yes, let's give them an opportunity. And it would be the same vice versa. So it's important to kind of consider that when you're applying, but also when you are in the organization, to think about any location move as to what it would be, which would be kind of moving to a new team, moving to a new opportunity. So therefore, it's a development opportunity. It is, even if it is at the same role level, it is progression to a certain extent. So you would need to kind of be putting your best foot forward if you did want to be considered for that. So it's important to make sure that you are putting in the work and the effort to demonstrate that you are an employee and a candidate that the company wants to give that opportunity to and to support for those location moves. But absolutely, it's very, very common for people to move across locations at Aon, and I know it's similar at EY as well. But it kind of does it does depend on the candidate and kind of what they're able to bring to the table as kind of part of that opportunity.
And most job offers I've seen seem to be in London. Where do I go to see regional office roles advertised?
I know for EY, sort of, if you go onto our careers website, whenever any job offer that's available, sort of there should be drop down showing you what's available in what different regional office. And I believe they probably pop up advertising everywhere. I assume it's pretty similar sort of with most places. If you go onto the official careers website for that company, then it may just be that the regional offices haven't opened up their application process yet. I know some of ours aren't opening until sort of, I think it's next week ours open. So that the London ones may just be the first ones to go on because they have more on there, so there's more availability. So I'd just say just keep looking around and try the official websites for different companies you might want to look at.
Yeah, I think it probably varies quite a lot between different sectors as well. So I know in publishing, it's very London centric, but there's a lot more roles in like smaller companies outside London. But then they're not going to be the ones that have the graduate scheme. So you sometimes have to just check around lots of companies' websites just to find out what's available.
And the graduate job boards as well. So kind of places like TARGETjobs where you can,
exactly.
when you're searching for roles, you can search for a location specifically. That will bring up opportunities. And, organisations like Aon, our London roles are on there, but also the regional kind of roles are on there at the exact same time. So if you can see the London role, you should be able to see the regional versions at the same time on places like TARGETjobs.
Do you think, in the current circumstances, given that everyone's remote working, graduates could essentially work for any company anywhere at the moment?
I think the kind of the opportunities are starting to open up. I think as Joe kind of touched on earlier, we're not going to be converting to an entirely virtual working world. That's not what happened. That's not what's happened, and it's not practical. It has built in some flexibility, and there will be probably some more virtual elements to all of our roles moving forward now that we have kind of the technology and the understanding and kind of can see the value in them. But actually the kind of the face-to-face element of it is still very important when it is available. So I don't think it's going to be a case that we're going to be shifting entirely virtual, so therefore anyone could kind of technically work anywhere. I think there is increased flexibility, and I think the ability to work across different locations will be there, but I don't think it's going to be kind of 100% virtual. I don't think any of us would want it to be. I don't think that's what most graduates would want out of a kind of a graduate working experience, because it's not just about kind of managing to do your role in a virtual environment. It's about so much more. It's about the company culture. It's about the colleagues and the network that you build. It's about kind of the life that's built around that as well. So I don't think an entirely virtual world is what we're heading for, but I do think that there is definitely increased flexibility in the opportunities available. Absolutely.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about working outside London?
For me, it'd be the opportunities that people think they don't have availability to. As I mentioned earlier, sort of every regional office has partners, senior managers, directors, and there is still sort of a clear career path where you can, if you want to sort of go for the heights, and the top jobs, then there is a way to get there through that just by being in the regional office. And also sort of from the networking side of it, there is, just because companies may be based in London, there are still sort of offices and stuff up and down the country, and there are still other big companies around there where you can do different networking locally. Maybe different industries that you won't see in London. So for example, sort of in Sheffield and Leeds, the construction industry is quite big, which you won't really see as much in London because it's a bit more financial from that point of view. So it's just, I think for me to summarize, it's just more sort of to say London's not always the be all and end all to show success is there. You can still have success in the regional office as well, and still sort of reach the career goals that you can set yourself.
Probably the last one. How would you advise us to think about career progression? Should we plan it out and set milestones to achieve, or go with the flow?
I think there's a little bit of a mixture, to be honest. I think it's important to have career goals and have career kind of the motivation for a specific career path, especially when looking to start a graduate program or an apprenticeship where there is kind of a structured training development, there is studies, qualifications that are involved in it. You're never going to be successful in that if you don't have the kind of the drive to reach that end goal. But I do think it's important to give yourself some flexibility in that as well, because whether it be allowing flexibility around the time it's going to take for you to get from A to B, because workloads can change, personal situations can change. I think that's incredibly important. Or whether it's giving yourself the opportunity to consider development outside of what you initially thought you wanted. Starting off in a graduate role, in an apprenticeship level role, most of you will have kind of very little, if any at all, industry experience. And actually, it may be that once you kind of are in the role and you're a year, 2 years down, you start to realize kind of it almost opens up the opportunities that are available to you and the opportunities to specialize in different areas, or to grow skills in kind of different parts of the business, or to build knowledge in different areas that you maybe on day one didn't realize was an option, or didn't realize it was something that you would want to do. But I think there's an element of both in there. I think it's absolutely important to set yourself goals. It's absolutely important to have strong career motivation when starting an early careers program, but give yourself the option to kind of to grow and develop, because ultimately you're starting these careers that you're going to be in for very long time, that you're going to be working for the next 50 years. So the likelihood that you're going to be doing the same thing in 50 years that you're doing now is kind of very small. So the option to kind of grow and develop in not just kind of vertically, but also diagonally, or kind of horizontally, or kind of however you want to grow your career, I think is really, really important. Or even kind of moving into different careers. I worked in publishing for 8 years before I started working in recruitment. And I started in recruitment about 10 years ago. So I know I don't look old enough, but it's important to kind of let yourself have that time to develop and to learn what you kind of want to do, because that's how you'll get to a role that you really want to. And I think that's important. I think the other important thing about development is to kind of really develop that relationship with your manager where you can be open about your goals, and kind of talk to them about what you're looking to achieve from your current role, but also from future roles as well. You want your manager to be someone that you can talk to about development opportunities, promotion opportunities, even secondment opportunities outside of your current role, as they can be absolutely vital in kind of helping to support you achieve that success. So it's really important to kind of build that good relationship with your manager and have those conversations kind of early on and throughout your career.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I hope that's been useful for everyone, and thank you very much to Jo and Rosie for being our panelists.